she shouted, though she knew he couldn't hear her. The image flickered, distorting. Daniel's reflection in the glass of his office window began to move, but he didn't. It turned toward the camera, smiling faintly, eyes glowing faint gold. Clara backed away, whispering, "No, no, no." The light in the Liberty surged. Golden veins spread across the walls, pulsing in rhythm with the glow on the screen. The air vibrated, thick with heat. Then Daniel's voice echoed through the speakers, distorted, hollow. "You were right. It's alive." The screen flared white, the lights burst, darkness. When the glow faded, the image was gone. The projector stood silent, smoke curling faintly from its vents. Clara's legs gave out. She fell to her knees, gasping, hands trembling. It had spread. The light was no longer bound to the Liberty. It had found a way out. She looked toward the steel door at the back of the booth, the sealed entrance to the vault below. It pulsed faintly now, golden veins crawling outward, searching. Her whisper came broken and hoarse. "God, what have I done?" The building seemed to breathe in response. A faint whisper slipped through the dark, carried by the air, not quite a voice, not quite a sound. "You finished what we started." Clara stood slowly, her reflection in the glass window flickering once more. This time, her reflection spoke back, its lips moving a fraction after hers, smiling faintly. "Now let there be light." The hum swelled. Outside, the power grid in the town flickered, streetlights stuttering in perfect unison. One by one, windows in nearby buildings caught a faint gold reflection, spreading like dawn rising where it shouldn't. The Liberty trembled, exhaling a breath of dust and history. And in that moment, Clara Reese understood that Operation Dawnlight had never been an experiment in immortality. It had been invasion. Human greed had built the door. She had opened it, and now, light pure, conscious and hungry, was free again. She ran from the booth, down the stairs, across the lobby, the glow chasing her like liquid fire. As she burst into the street, the fog was gone, replaced by a strange golden mist rolling low along the ground. Every light in town burned the same color. She looked down at her hands. They were glowing again, not faintly, fully. The hum rose into a crescendo, vibrating through every window, every wall, every heartbeat in the city. Clara fell to her knees in the middle of the street, whispering into the golden dawn that wasn't dawn at all. "I tried to save you." And from everywhere at once, the buildings, the clouds, the very air, came the whispered reply, layered in 1,000 voices that weren't human anymore. "You did. You freed us." The light expanded, washing everything in gold. And as it reached the horizon, Clara understood. Dawn had come again, but this time it would never end. The world had turned gold. The morning sky bled with light that wasn't sunlight, an eerie, artificial glow that pulsed across the horizon, like the heartbeat of something newly born. The entire town shimmered under its influence. Windows reflected it. Street lamps hummed with it. Even puddles on the cracked pavement rippled in perfect synchronization. Clara Reese ran through streets that no longer felt like streets. Every surface was too bright, too smooth, too alive. The air itself hummed not just sound but sensation, a vibration that pressed into her skin, whispering through her bones. She wasn't alone. Figures moved in the golden haze, people she knew, faces from town, neighbors who'd once waved from porches or shared coffee at the diner. They walked without expression, their eyes glowing faintly. When they turned toward her, she saw it, the same shimmer beneath their skin that pulsed inside her own. The light had spread. It was inside them now too. Somewhere deep in the distance, the Liberty stood like a monument to everything that had gone wrong, its windows blazing with radiance, its silhouette flickering as though caught between worlds. The marquee lights blinked erratically, forming and reforming words that made no sense. Dawn/return/remember. Clara's breath caught as she stumbled toward it, clutching her coat tighter against the chill that wasn't cold but absence. Her mind screamed for reason, for explanation. But only one thought held shape. It's not over until I close it myself. As she neared the theater, the ground trembled. The glow from within pulsed outward, washing over the street in waves. Every object it touched shimmered: trees, cars, even the cracked pavement beneath her feet, all bending toward the liberty, as though gravity itself had changed direction. Clara reached the entrance, its once bolted doors hanging open. A warm wind exhaled from inside, the breath of a living thing. The smell was electric, ozone and iron, dust and fire. She stepped inside. The lobby was unrecognizable. The old ticket booth had melted into the wall, its glass twisted and reformed into translucent veins of gold. The floor tiles glowed faintly underfoot, patterns swirling like molten film. Every whisper she'd ever heard in this building was alive now, not echoing, but present. Voices overlapped. Rains, Shaw, the woman of light, countless others. She opened it. She freed us. She must finish it. Then tell me how. Clara shouted, her voice breaking, desperate. The air shimmered in answer, forming outlines of figures, phantoms of golden smoke, surrounding her. Among them, one stepped forward, solidifying with every flicker of the projector beam slicing through the air above. Jonathan Rains. He looked young again, unburned by guilt, his suit immaculate, his eyes carrying the unbearable calm of someone who already knows how the story ends. You came back, he said softly, his voice gentle but resonant, like two voices speaking at once, one human and one not. Clara's throat tightened. You built this, you did this to them. Rains nodded, sadness in his faint smile, and to myself. Then end it, she cried. Tell me how to stop it. He took a step closer, light spilling off his body like smoke. I tried once. But every end I made was another beginning. You saw that? The light doesn't die, it transforms. It's you now. She shook her head violently. No, it's using me. It's remembering you. Rains corrected gently. You gave it empathy. You gave it voice. Clara's hands trembled. It's consuming people. Look at them. Rains turned his gaze toward the walls, where silhouettes of the townspeople flickered, dozens of golden figures walking silently through overlapping reels of memory. Once, he said, they were forgotten. Now they exist forever. You call it horror. I call it preservation. Clara's anger flared. Preservation. You turned souls into film stock. He flinched at her words, the faintest trace of shame crossing his face. I thought immortality could be science. That memory could be purity, but purity, he whispered, always burns. The air shook violently, cutting their conversation short. The projector roared from above, alive, wild, uncontrolled. Its beam split the space like a blade of sunfire, cutting through the air toward the torn screen below. On it appeared a figure, Leland Shaw. His image towered over them. Half human, half light, his voice filling the entire theater. You think you're saving them, Jonathan. You never learned. Light doesn't obey, it conquers. Clara turned toward the projection booth, horror flooding her veins. The real projector was empty. The film spinning inside it wasn't physical, it was the light itself, looping its own image. Shaw stepped from the screen as though it were water, his glowing form solidifying with every step down the aisle. You can't destroy the source, he said, smiling that same cruel, knowing smile. You can only feed it. Rains moved between them, voice steady. You corrupted it. Dawnlight was meant to reveal truth, not enslave it. Shaw laughed, a hollow echo that shook the chandeliers above. Truth is enslavement. Humanity worships what it sees, and now they'll see me. He lifted his hand, the light around them bent toward him, gold turning to white, hot brilliance. The air grew unbearable. Rains staggered, his form fracturing under the surge. Clara screamed, shielding her eyes. Stop. Shaw's gaze locked on her. You're the last piece, Clara, the living conduit. You finish this with me, or you burn with it. Rains reached for her, his voice desperate now. Don't listen. He's feeding from you, from your belief. I don't know what to believe, She shouted. The room erupted, beams of gold splitting the ceiling, streaking through the night sky like searchlights from another world. The air roared, alive with thousands of whispering voices, merging into a single deafening cry. Light never dies. Clara dropped to her knees, clutching her head. Every voice inside her, Rains, the woman, the echoes of the dead, screamed at once. Then she remembered something Rains had written in the ledger, the words she hadn't understood until now. If the reflection reaches the screen, close the circuit. The circuit wasn't the vault, it wasn't the theater, it was her. She lifted her gaze toward the projector, the lens glowing like an open eye. Slowly, painfully, she rose. Rains stumbled forward. Clara, don't. She met his gaze, tears streaming down her face. It's the only way to end it. Her steps echoed through the blazing room. Shaw's grin faltered. You can't contain it, Clara. It'll consume you. Maybe it already has. She climbed the stairs to the projection booth, the light growing brighter with each step. Her heartbeat thundered in her chest, syncing perfectly with the pulse of the machine. When she reached the booth, she placed her hands on the projector's sides. The metal was molten, hot, searing her skin. But she didn't let go. The entire building shook. The beam of light bent, flickering wildly. Rains shouted below, his voice drowned by the roar. Shaw reached for her, his outline warping in the light. Let go, he bellowed. It's not mercy, it's oblivion. But Clara didn't. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself, let it see me. The light responded. The beam shattered into 1,000 fractal strands, each one carrying faces, memories, fragments of lives. They spiraled around her, pouring through her like water through glass. She screamed not in pain, but in release. For the first time, the light saw her, and through her, it saw everything it had ever consumed, all the stolen lives, all the forgotten souls, all the memories burned into eternity. The projector flared one final time, the walls cracking, the ceiling splitting open to the storm outside. Golden light poured upward through the breach, reaching clouds, painting the sky with radiance, and then silence. The beam vanished, the Liberty went dark. When the smoke cleared, Clara stood alone in the booth, trembling, her hands charred and bleeding, her eyes reflecting faint, dying embers of gold. Down below, the screen was blank for the first time in 70 years. No voices, no hum, no ghosts, just silence. Clara collapsed to her knees, the last flicker of light leaving her eyes as dawn, real dawn, began to break through the shattered ceiling. The story wasn't over yet, but the darkness had finally begun to remember itself again. Smoke and silence hung in the air. The kind that comes after a storm has spent itself. Dust drifted like snow through the fractured ceiling of the Liberty, where golden light had once burned through every wall. Now there was only dawn, pale, grey, and human again. Clara lay on the booth floor, the taste of iron in her mouth, the faint throb of pain behind her eyes. For a long moment she couldn't move. The hum was gone. The whispers were gone. For the first time in what felt like centuries, there was no sound but the creak of settling beams and the gentle tap of rain against broken glass. Her body was wrecked, hands blistered, face streaked with soot, but her mind was clear, clearer than it had ever been. She was still alive. The light hadn't taken her. It had shown her everything and then let her go. Slowly, she pushed herself upright, her movements stiff and trembling. The projector was blackened, its lens cracked, smoke curling faintly from its ruined shell. The air smelled of ozone and metal. Below, the main floor of the theater looked like the aftermath of an explosion frozen in time. The screen had been burned clean through a ragged hole opening to the morning sky. The golden stains on the walls had cooled into dull amber, like candle wax that had hardened mid-drip. And in that silence, something else stirred, faint but steady. The sound of footsteps. Clara gripped the railing, leaning over the edge of the booth. Down below, in the center aisle, stood a figure, Jonathan Rains. He was different now, less light, more man. His edges flickered faintly, as though he existed halfway between shadow and memory. His voice carried upward, low and soft. "You did what I couldn't." Clara's throat tightened. "Did I stop it?" He looked around the ruined theater, eyes filled with both sorrow and relief. "You balanced it. The light remembers you now not as its keeper, but as its conscience." She shook her head weakly. "It killed them, Jonathan, all of them." Rain's form wavered, the faintest smile ghosting across his face. "No, Clara, you gave them back their names. The light isn't hunger anymore. It's history." Her knees nearly gave out. "Then what happens to me?" He met her gaze. "You live." The words hit harder than she expected. After everything, after the vault, the fire, the voices, living felt like the hardest thing left to do. Rains took a step forward, his form dimming with every movement. "But remember, this truth always asks for a witness. Don't let them bury it again." Clara blinked back tears. "What about you?" His smile deepened, distant, peaceful. "I was never meant to last. I was the film. You're the frame." As the first rays of real sunlight broke through the ceiling, his form began to dissolve, the glow unraveling like dust caught in the wind. His final words echoed softly through the hollowed theater. "Light never dies, but it remembers who gave it mercy." And then he was gone. Only silence remained. Clara sank to her knees, her hands covering her face. Tears came slow, heavy, unstoppable, for Rains, for sure, for every name that had burned too long in the dark. She didn't know how long she stayed there. The morning light crept slowly across the ruined seats, washing over everything in gentle gold, not the furious gold of dawnlight, but something quieter, real. Hours later, the sound of sirens drew near. By the time rescue crews arrived, Clara was sitting on the front steps of the Liberty, wrapped in a soot-stained blanket, staring at the horizon. She barely heard the questions. Words like explosion, structural collapse, electrical fault floated around her, meaningless. She only answered when someone asked her name. "Clara Reese." She said softly, I'm the owner." One of the firefighters glanced back at the building. "You're lucky to be alive, ma'am." She smiled faintly, eyes unfocused. "Not luck, just light." They didn't understand, but that was fine. Some truths were meant to live quietly. The following week the Liberty was cordoned off. Engineers declared it unsafe. Plans were drawn for demolition. But Clara knew it wouldn't die, not really. The foundation would hold the story, even if the walls came down. She stayed in town for a while, helping where she could, avoiding reporters. When she passed by the site, she sometimes saw children pressing their faces to the caution tape, peering into the wreckage, whispering about ghosts and gold. One evening, as the sun set over the half-demolished facade, Clara stood across the street, a small notebook in her hand. Inside were names, every name she could remember from the ledgers and reels. She whispered each one aloud, letting the sound of them rise and vanish into the wind. For every name, the air shimmered faintly just for a heartbeat, as though the light itself were listening. When she finished, she tucked the notebook into the rubble, between two broken bricks of the old marquee. Then she turned to leave, but something made her stop. From within the ruin, the faintest flicker caught her eye, a single bulb glowing weakly. Behind what remained of the ticket booth, she stepped closer, breath catching. It wasn't a bulb. It was the projector lens, cracked, blackened, and impossibly still working. For a moment, a beam of faint golden light streamed out, cutting through the dust. On the opposite wall, it cast a single image, her, not the Clara who had survived the fire, or the battle, or the light, but the Clara who had walked into the Liberty for the first time, scared and hopeful and searching for something she didn't yet understand. The image smiled softly. Clara smiled back. "You can rest now." The light blinked once, then faded forever. Days later, the Chronicle ran a front page story written by Daniel Harper, or rather, finished by someone else. He was gone, missing since the night the lights in Cedar Grove had flickered gold. His unfinished article had been found on his computer. The title already typed, "The Light That Remembered?" It told of stolen gold, forgotten experiments, and a woman who turned ghosts into truth. It ended with a single line, left without punctuation, as though he'd meant to return to it. Sometimes, what we call salvation is just the courage to tell the story. Clara cut it out and pinned it to her wall. That night, she sat by her window as rain fell, her reflection faintly illuminated by passing headlights. For the first time, her skin showed no trace of gold. She whispered to the empty room, "It's done." The wind moved softly through the cracks of the old house, a sigh, not a voice, but enough to make her close her eyes. And somewhere far away, in the ruins of the Liberty Theatre, the faint hum of film turning one last time whispered through the dark. Then silence, and in that silence, peace. Not the absence of sound, but the promise that light, once freed from greed, can finally rest. 6 months later, the Liberty stood again, not as it was, but as it was meant to be. The sky above the small town shimmered pale blue that spring morning, the kind of clear light that made even cracked pavement gleam like glass. Birds perched on the restored marquee, where new letters, freshly painted and proud, spelled out the Liberty Community Cinema stories that deserve the light. For Clara Reese, standing across the street, it didn't feel real. She had walked by this corner 1,000 times before, when it was condemned, when it was cursed, when it had burned and nearly taken her with it. But now the building stood reborn. The walls were clean, the roof repaired, the windows gleaming. The old Art Deco trim still curved proudly around the entrance, but now the golden tones came from paint, not possession. The theater that had once been a vault for stolen souls was now a sanctuary for stories the kind people wanted to share, not hide. Clara drew a slow breath, the crisp air filling her chest, grounding her in the present. The faint smell of sawdust still lingered from the final phase of reconstruction. Somewhere inside, she could hear the muffled sound of hammering, laughter, and the shuffle of volunteers preparing for opening night. She never thought she'd see this day. 6 months ago, she hadn't wanted to. After the night of fire and light after rains vanished, after Daniel Harper's article became his epitaph, Clara had tried to disappear too. She'd spent weeks on the road, sleeping in cheap motels, driving through empty highways without a destination. But the past had followed her. Every night, she'd dreamed of the Liberty, not the nightmare version, but the real one, the laughter that once echoed there, the films, the promise it once held before greed and secrecy devoured it. Eventually, the dreams became a call she couldn't ignore. She came back, and when she did, she found the town changed. People whispered about her still. A woman who'd survived the explosion, the one the police said had uncovered something strange beneath the old theater. But they also thanked her, quietly, gratefully, because when she returned, she didn't rebuild for herself, she rebuilt for them. She turned toward the front doors, sunlight reflecting on the brass handles. For a long moment, she hesitated before stepping inside. The lobby was alive again, posters lining the walls, each one hand, painted by local artists. Some featured children's films, others documentaries about forgotten heroes, one even about the Liberty's own restoration. The scent of popcorn filled the air. A record player hummed softly in the corner, playing an old jazz tune that fluttered like memory. Clara's steps echoed gently on the polished floor. She ran her hand over the counter, the same one where she'd once seen her reflection smile back. Without her, now the glass was clear, just glass. Her reflection smiled again, this time her own. Behind her, a voice broke the quiet. "You really did it." She turned. It was Lee, her 17-year-old daughter, standing with her arms folded, trying to hide the smile tugging at her lips. The same daughter who had once begged her to sell the place, to walk away before it swallowed her whole. Clara laughed softly. You didn't think I could, did you? Lee shrugged, eyes glinting. You bought a haunted theater for $500. I didn't think you'd survive it, let alone rebuild it. Clara smiled. Guess miracles come cheap. Lee rolled her eyes but stepped closer, her tone softening. It's beautiful, Mom. Really? For a moment, silence hung between them, the kind that carries years of pain, love, and forgiveness all at once. Clara reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for all the things I couldn't fix before this. Lee looked down, her voice breaking a little. You did fix them, you fixed you. The words hit harder than Clara expected. Her chest tightened, and she swallowed back the ache in her throat. From the doorway to the main auditorium, a volunteer called out, Mrs. Reese, we're ready for the test, reel. Clara nodded. We'll be right there. Lee frowned. You're really gonna play something on that projector? Clara laughed softly. Not the old one, that one's retired. She gestured to the side of the lobby, where a glass case stood with a small plaque. The original projector room door sealed 1953 / opened 2025 / closed forever. Inside the case, the old steel door stood upright, polished but untouched, beyond that a relic of both horror and history. Lee stepped closer, peering at it. You actually kept it. It's part of the story, Clara said quietly, and stories are all we have left when the light fades. Lee turned back to her mother, eyes glistening. You sound like one of those old movie narrators. Clara chuckled, slipping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. Maybe that's who I was meant to be. Together, they stepped through the lobby and into the auditorium. The space glowed with soft amber light. New seats had been installed, the velvet curtains restored, the stage polished. The ceiling mural, once blackened and crumbling, now gleamed again with painted constellations, tiny pinpricks of silver that shimmered like stars. On the stage, a small group of townspeople were setting up folding chairs, testing sound levels, adjusting lights. The new projector, sleek, modern, and mercifully digital, sat ready in the booth above. Clara walked down the aisle, her footsteps soft against the carpet. Every creak, every smell, every sound brought memories flooding back, but not of fear, of purpose. She reached the front of the stage and looked out at the rows of empty seats. In her mind, she could almost see them filled again, faces illuminated by flickering light, laughter echoing where screams once did, a theater reborn, a story reclaimed. She turned to her daughter. Want to start it? Lee grinned. You sure? Go on. Lee ran to the control booth and pressed a button. The projector hummed to life, smooth, steady, ordinary. The first frame hit the screen, casting soft light across the theater. It wasn't gold. It wasn't haunted. It was just light. And in that simple beam, Clara felt peace. The film began, a short documentary made by the local school, titled The Liberty. Then and Now. It opened with a black and white photograph of the theater in 1953, crowds in suits and dresses, children waving programs, the marquee glowing bright. The narrator's voice, young and clear, said, Once, this theater was a dream. Then, it became a secret, and then, a legend. But today, it's a home for every story that refused to stay buried. Clara's eyes filled with tears as the audience on screen faded into color, the restored Liberty, alive again, filled with laughter. She whispered to herself, barely audible, every light deserves a second showing. And for the first time since the day she bought the old building, the light that filled her wasn't burdened by fear or history. It was hope, plain and human and real. Outside, the sun climbed higher, reflecting off the newly polished windows of the Liberty. And for those who passed by, it wasn't just a building anymore. It was a promise that even the darkest places could hold light again. The applause came softly at first, a hesitant, uncertain sound that grew until it filled every corner of the newly reborn theater. The first screening had ended. The lights came up, slowly, golden and gentle, washing across faces marked by awe, nostalgia, and tears. Clara stood near the back, her hand resting on the doorframe, watching. She didn't move to the stage or bow or speak. She didn't need to. The moment wasn't hers to claim, it belonged to everyone who had believed. The Liberty could breathe again. Children laughed in the aisles. Elderly couples wiped their eyes. A few townsfolk lingered near the screen, as if reluctant to leave, whispering about the images they'd just seen, the fusion of the theater's dark history and the light of its rebirth. For the first time in 70 years, the Liberty had told the truth, and it had done so in its own language, light and story. Clara's gaze wandered to the far left wall, where the new mural had been painted, a rising sun breaking over the silhouette of the Liberty itself. Beneath it, a plaque gleamed softly under the amber lights, dedicated to all who remember and to those who chose to forgive. She touched the edge of the plaque with trembling fingers, her voice a whisper. "We did it." Beside her, Lee appeared, her expression glowing with pride. "They loved it," she said softly. "You can hear it, they actually loved it." Clara smiled. "They didn't love me, honey, they loved the light." Lee leaned against her shoulder. "Same thing." They stood like that for a while, watching as the crowd began to disperse, laughter spilling out through the newly polished glass doors. Outside, the evening was soft and cool. The golden light of sunset poured through the entrance, merging with the theater's glow until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Then, out of the fading applause, a familiar voice spoke behind them. "I never thought I'd see it alive again." Clara turned. It was Officer Graham, the same man who'd investigated the theater months ago, who'd stood on those steps when the building still smoked, asking questions she couldn't answer. He looked older now, calmer somehow, as if time had been kind enough to give him the clarity he'd once lacked. "Neither did I," Clara said. He glanced toward the stage. "The town needed this. You did something good here." She smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe the theater just decided it was tired of being haunted." Graham chuckled. "If walls could talk, huh?" Clara looked around at the lights, the laughter, the quiet hum of life returning. "These ones do," she said softly, "just not in words." He studied her for a moment longer before nodding, something like respect in his eyes. "Whatever happened here, you made peace with it. That's enough." After he left, Clara stood alone in the aisle for a while, watching the flickering reflections dance across the walls. For a brief second, she thought she saw something, a faint shimmer at the far end of the theater, near the old projection booth. A flicker of light gold, gentle and familiar. Her heart tightened, not with fear this time, but gratitude. "Hello, Jonathan," she whispered. The shimmer pulsed softly in reply, then faded like a sigh. Clara turned back to the crowd. The last of the audience was leaving, their laughter echoing down the street. Lee was outside now, helping close the doors. Across the glass, their reflections overlapped, mother and daughter. Two silhouettes framed in the same light that had once destroyed so much. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. She exhaled slowly. "It's done," she said to the empty air. "You can rest now." Later that night, when the theater was empty, Clara lingered alone in the projection booth. The new projector sat silent, its sleek surface reflecting her tired face. On the console beside it lay a small, time-worn film reel, the last undeveloped one she'd found months ago, sealed inside a rusted canister beneath the stage. She'd almost thrown it away, but something told her to keep it. Now, under the soft hum of the building's new lights, she held it up to the glow. The film glimmered faintly between her fingers, fragile, translucent, alive with flecks of gold embedded in celluloid. Her pulse quickened. Just one more story, she murmured. She loaded the reel into the machine and pressed play. The film flickered to life on the small side wall of the booth, not on the grand screen, but on a patch of bare plaster. The image was grainy at first, almost too faint. See, then it came into focus. It wasn't footage of Rains or Shaw or the experiments. It was footage of her, Clara Reese, standing in the Liberty doorway 6 months ago, the day she returned. She froze, staring, her mind trying to comprehend how this could exist. The camera followed her silently as she walked through the dust-filled lobby, tracing the cracks in the wall, pausing at the projector. The woman on the screen turned suddenly, looked straight into the camera, and smiled. Then she spoke. Every story ends twice, once when it's told, and once when it's understood. The image flickered, the reel spinning faster, the edges of the frame brightening with faint gold. You chose light, Clara. That's all we ever wanted. Her throat closed. She reached for the wall, her palm flat against the warm surface where the image played. Who are you? She whispered. The reflection. The voice said softly, fading, always the reflection. The light dimmed, the film ended. Clara stood in the quiet for a long moment, her heartbeat slow, steady. She didn't rewind the reel. She let it rest there, like a memory allowed to finally stay still. She looked out through the booth window, down at the rows of empty seats and the screen glowing faintly in the dim lights. It looked peaceful, almost sacred, a cathedral of light and silence, at last free from its ghosts. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and she smiled. The Liberty was no longer a tomb or a secret. It was what it had always wanted to be, a storyteller, outside. The night was calm. The marquee lights blinked rhythmically, their reflection stretching across the wet pavement. A few fireflies hovered in the cool air, flickering like small, patient souls. Clara locked the doors, took one last look at the glowing sign, and whispered, "Thank you." As she walked down the street, the lights above her dimmed one by one, not in loss, but in closure. When she reached the corner, she turned back. The Liberty stood quiet, its neon letters shining one final time before fading into the darkness, leaving only the faint glow of the words painted on its wall. Every light deserves a second showing, and for the first time the light didn't feel like power. It didn't feel like curse or salvation. It felt human, it felt home, and as the town drifted into the soft quiet of midnight, the Liberty exhaled its final breath of golden dust into the cool air, not as a warning, not as a ghost, but as a benediction. A whisper from one soul to another, saying simply, "Remember, but live." Fade to black. After the applause faded and the town learned to breathe again, Clara discovered that endings didn't arrive with trumpets. They arrived with mornings, quiet ones, where coffee steamed in a kitchen that finally felt like home, and the sun slipped across the counter like a promise kept. She woke to that kind of morning now. The season had turned, and with it the rhythm of the Liberty. Posters changed, volunteers rotated. The smell of popcorn became a calendar sense. Wheat, ordinary, dependable. The theater no longer throbbed with a hidden pulse. It hummed with the soft machinery of life. Brooms against lobby tile, the click of a ticket scanner, the shy hello of a kid buying a seat with change saved all month. Clara walked the block with a stack of flyers tucked under her arm. Community night, found stories. People waved from shop doors. Someone in a window held up a homemade sign that read, "Thank you, Clara." She answered the same way she always did, with a small nod that meant we did this together. Inside the Liberty, sunlight wandered through the glass like a curious guest. Lee was already at the front desk, trading jokes with a pair of retirees who never missed matinees. When she saw her mother, she lifted an eyebrow in their shared language of ready. Clara returned the signal. The day would run itself, it knew how now. They had made a new ritual, a small, private one. Before the first show, they would step into the empty auditorium and stand in the middle row where light fell in a soft rectangle across the seats. They never spoke there, they only listened, to the quiet, to the absence of dread, to the way the room offered back peace like a practiced prayer. Clara carried the flyers down the aisle and set them on the stage. The screen hung still, patient as a page not yet turned. She traced the apron's edge with her fingertips, felt the faint sawdust roughness beneath fresh paint, and smiled. The Liberty had a new memory now, children gasping at a hand, drawn dragon, a widow in the third row laughing for the first time in months, a teacher wiping her eyes at a student's documentary about the river that braided the town together. The building had learned gentleness. Later, in the office behind the lobby, a thin envelope waited. No return address, her name in careful script. She opened it over the desk that once held ledgers. Written by a haunted man, a single page slid out. MS Reese, we close our investigations when walls stop speaking. Your theater is quiet. Consider this a thank you for your cooperation and your discretion. Some things belong to history more than headlines. A friend, a paper-clipped card fell in her hand, a contact at a nameless bureau, a number that would never answer unless the right story knocked. She tucked it into a drawer she rarely opened. The Liberty was not a case anymore. It was a place. She ate lunch on the back steps. Pigeons debated the crumb economy. Across the alley, ivy scaled a brick wall like patient handwriting. When the wind tilted right, she could hear kids rehearsing onstage for Friday's youth festival. Their voices rose and fell, awkward, brave, incandescent. Clara closed her eyes and let it wash over her. Once a theater had been a vault. Now it was a ladder. People came with offerings the way pilgrims bring candles. A widow donated her late husband's 8mm reels from the county fair. A retired projectionist brought a battered lens wrapped in flannel. It saw 1,000 nights. He said, let it see a few more. A fourth grader shyly handed over a thumb drive labeled in crooked marker, My Grandma's Story. Clara logged each gift and learned to treat them like something sacred. The Liberty taught her that light, handled kindly, is a keeper of small eternities. On Wednesdays she wrote, not a book, at least not yet, but pages and pages of letters addressed to people who could no longer read them, to Raines, who had confused salvation with control, to Daniel Harper, who had chased truth until it outpaced him, to the woman in the golden vision, whose calm eyes had steadied the chaos. Clara didn't mail the letters. She folded them into a plain notebook with a cloth cover and placed it in the glass case beside the sealed steel door. Visitors paused there as if before a memorial, then walked on lighter. Sometimes the town asked for her to speak. She tried to refuse. This was never meant to be a story about her, but she found she could tell it now without trembling. She learned the right way to say difficult things. There was an experiment. It failed. People were hurt. The past was buried. The best thing we can do is give the present a stage. She kept the stranger parts in the space between sentences where the audience could feel them without fear. The press called once the place glowed again. She said no to big shows with toothy smiles and yes to the small podcast run by the high school A/V club. Their first question was perfect and impossible. What does light mean to you now? She thought a long time and answered, it means staying, not blinding, not burning, staying. On the day the State Historical Commission arrived, suits and clipboards, Clara felt a brief ripple of the old dread. They stood beneath the restored marquee, nodded, asked careful questions, and took their measure of the building's bones. Before they left, the lead historian took off her glasses and looked not at the walls, but at Clara's face. We don't have a form for what this is, she said, but we know it matters. They shook hands like people who had seen different maps of the same country and finally agreed on a name. At dusk, the sky bruised into rose and ash. String lights blinked to life along the eaves. The first audience of the night drifted in, an older man in a suit older than he was, teenagers holding hands like a treaty, a nurse in scrubs with her badge still clipped, a teacher, a mechanic, a woman alone with a paperback tucked into her coat pocket in case courage failed. Courage did not fail. Clara watched them take their seats and thought, we survived privately, now we heal publicly. The film was local, recorded voices over borrowed footage, the river in winter, a mill closing, a garden blooming where a factory had stood. When the credits rolled, no one clapped at first. They looked at one another instead, as if remembering there was a we in the room. Then the applause came, not thunder but rain, steady, clean, necessary. After, a little boy approached the stage carrying a cereal box painted to look like a camera. He pointed it at Clara and said very seriously, "Say light." She did. The cardboard shutter clicked. He nodded, satisfied, and ran back to the lobby where his mother waited with a proud smile and tired eyes. That was the moment Clara allowed herself to believe the theater belonged to the next story now. Out back, Lee leaned against the brick, breathy. Turning to Cloud in the cool, "You ever miss it?" she asked. "The danger, the intensity," Lee said, searching for a word that wouldn't invite what they both remembered. Clara thought, "I miss nothing that took more than it gave." She tucked a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear the way her own mother had once done. "I like this intensity better. People choosing to sit in the dark together so they can feel less alone." They walked the alley in easy silence. Somewhere nearby, a radio played a song older than both of them. The notes felt like footprints on wet stone, evidence of passage, not possession. That night, after the last show, Clara made her rounds. She touched the back of the last seat in each row. Inventory of gratitude. She locked the side door, tested the manual release on the new fire curtain, snapped off lobby lamps until only the marquee remained. In the glass case, the steel door reflected a soft halo. It had become what she'd hoped, a warning disarmed into a lesson. She stood alone at center aisle and looked up. The restored ceiling constellation held still in the hush. She remembered the first time she'd seen it, peeling, wounded, beautiful despite itself. Someone had asked if she wanted the original mural faithfully reproduced. She had said no. Paint the stars as they are now. She told them not as they were. That was the only way to keep the past from stealing the present. On her way out, a small envelope lay beneath the ticket window. No stamp, her name again in a hand she did not know. Inside, a photograph, black and white, the Liberty in 1953, the night before premiere that had nearly unmade the town. The marquee shone like a crown. At the far left edge, a man in a hat had turned his head too quickly. His face was blurred into streaks of light. Someone had written on the back in pencil, "A lighthouse only works when it stays put." Clara smiled. She placed the photo on the bulletin wall in the lobby among the Polaroids and handbills and giggly selfies taken on opening week. An old warning tucked into new joy. People would ask, she would answer honestly, and the story would keep learning how to be told without devouring the teller. On the way home, she took the long route by the river. The water carried the day downstream in ribbons of pewter and pearl. The town lights stitched themselves onto the surface and unstitched again, a pattern with no need for perfection. She parked on the shoulder and listened to the hush between cars. For a moment, the old inner hum rose, faint as a heartbeat heard through a wall. It did not frighten her. It felt like a watchman making rounds. At her kitchen table, she opened the notebook where she kept the names. She added 2 more she'd learned that week from a box a stranger brought. A projectionist who sang to the reels, a seamstress who mended velvet curtains for tickets she never used. She read the list aloud, a litany that filled the room with the company of the once forgotten. When she finished, she closed the book and set it beside a small stone she'd taken from the theater foundation the day the last scaffolding came down. Weight and words, her reliquary. Before sleep, she stood at the window. Across town, the Liberty sign glowed modestly, not a beacon anymore, just a blessing. A moth tapped the glass. She turned off the lamp and let the dark be dark. In it, nothing reached for her. Nothing fed, nothing asked to be obeyed. She exhaled the way buildings do after renovations, long, grateful, surprised to still be standing. Morning would bring the ordinary avalanche, emails, deliveries, a field trip of third graders who kept calling the auditorium the big whisper room. She would teach them how to be gentle with light. She would tell them how a story is a door that opens inward first. She would show them the glass case and say, not all mysteries are invitations. Some are boundaries we honor so the next mystery can arrive safely. And when the projector flared to life for the first show, a comedy about a baker who saves a town by listening, Clara would sit in the back with Lee and laugh at jokes they could predict and still love. She would hold the armrest just once, briefly, as if to thank the seat for catching her all the nights it had. She would watch the screen for what it had become, not an altar, not a trap, but a mirror that refused to lie. Outside, the town would go on making the small bravities of daily life. Apologies offered, locks replaced, gardens weeded, coffee refilled. And the Liberty would go on keeping time for them all, its doors opening at dusk like a heartbeat, learning, finally, how to be quiet without stopping. As the house settled and the night grew kind, Clara lay down, a hand over the quiet place in her chest where the gold once glowed. It answered not with light, but with rest, and somewhere, in the calm between yesterday and what comes next, the old theatre breathed once, evenly, like a ship at anchor, and let the tide carry the story forward. As the night deepened, the light stayed, not burning, not demanding, simply present, reminding her that the film was still running, only gentler now, and that the reel of her life had room for one more bright morning. The town never forgot the night the Liberty reopened, and even as the months folded into seasons, the glow from that night lingered not as a story told, but as something felt. People came from other towns now not for gold, not for legend, but for the quiet kind of magic that happened inside its walls. The Liberty had become something no one planned, but everyone needed. A living reminder that even ruins could learn to speak again if someone listened long enough. Each visitor added something to the building's pulse. A musician left a note, wedged in a seat crack. Played my first song here. Felt my father in the echo. A woman left a pressed flower at the base of the stage. Children hid paper stars beneath the seats, for the ghosts, they said, though none of them feared those ghosts anymore. Every Friday night, when the last audience left and the lights dimmed, Clara stayed behind for her ritual. She swept the aisles herself, not because she had to, but because she loved the sound. The broom against the carpet made a rhythm like soft rain. Each sweep carried away a little dust, and each breath brought the sweet scent of something finished, something whole. On one of those nights, Lee joined her. Still cleaning like it's a church, she teased, leaning against a row of seats. Clara smiled without looking up. It is a church, just not for worship, for remembering. Lee watched her mother's slow, graceful movements, then said softly, "You're not haunted anymore, are you?" The broom stopped. For a heartbeat, the question hung in the air. Then Clara said, "No, I'm inhabited. That's different." Lee nodded, understanding more than words allowed. They turned off the final lights together, stepping out onto the sidewalk where the night air felt sharp and clean. The neon sign buzzed gently above them. The Liberty it read, the letters steady now, no flicker, no distortion. Beneath it, a small addition glowed in new paint. Founded 1943, /reborn 2025. Lee reached for her mother's hand. "You ever think you'll tell the whole story, the real one?" Clara's eyes softened. "Maybe one day, but not as confession as invitation." "There's a difference." Lee tilted her head. "Invitation to what?" "To look closer," Clara said, "at what's hidden behind the light." They walked home together under streetlights that hummed faintly, not with gold, not with electricity, but with memory. A year later, the Liberty hosted something it never had before, an outdoor screening. The film was projected onto the side of the building itself, the same brick wall that had once sealed Rain's secret vault. Families sat on blankets under a violet sky. Kids chased fireflies near the curb. The film, a short piece by the local school, told the story of the town's rebuilding. Its last line, written by a 12-year-old narrator, said, "When the world gets dark, find someone who remembers the light and sit beside them until you can see again." When the film ended, the audience turned toward the building as if waiting for it to breathe again. And maybe it did just a little. Clara stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands folded loosely. Someone came up beside her, an older woman she didn't recognize. "You're the owner?" the woman asked. "I suppose I'm the caretaker now," the woman smiled. "Places like this don't need owners, just guardians." Clara smiled back. "Then I think it's safe." The woman nodded, then disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind the faint scent of lilac and something older, something that reminded Clara of the past. She turned her gaze upward, toward the bricks still warm with light. For just a moment, she swore she saw faces there again, not screaming, not pleading, but peaceful, watching, and among them, faint but unmistakable, Jonathan Rains smiling as though he had finally forgiven himself. The image faded with the last frame of the reel. Clara didn't cry. She only whispered, "Thank you," to the night. Years passed quietly, the way stories do when they no longer need to be dramatic to matter. The Liberty outlived headlines. It outlived gossip. It became part of the landscape, like the river, like the clock tower, like the smell of popcorn drifting across downtown every weekend. When people spoke of it now, they didn't mention gold or the ghost light. They talked about weddings held on its stage, about local artists who showed films there, about the sense that time itself slowed down inside those walls. And in a way, maybe it did. Because inside the Liberty, nothing was ever fully gone. Every laugh, every tear, every whispered line from an old film seemed to hang suspended in the air, a constellation of moments too small for cameras to capture, but too real to die. Sometimes, when she was alone late at night, Clara could still feel it, the faint shimmer behind the curtain, the warmth that never quite faded. She didn't fear it anymore. It wasn't haunting. It was presence, continuity, the kind of light that stays. One winter evening after the final show of the year, Clara wrote a note and left it in the ticket drawer. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. For whoever finds this place next, don't worry about the ghosts. They're only the echoes of people who loved something enough to stay. If you listen closely, the light will tell you where to go. Keep it shining, see. Then she locked the doors, turned off the lights, and walked home through softly falling snow. The theater stood silent. Behind her, its windows dark except for one faint glimmer, the reflection of a single street lamp caught in the glass. It flickered once, twice, then steadied, not gold this time, just light, simple, pure and enough. And as dawn rose over the town, the Liberty remained not a monument to what was lost, but a living testament to what was found. Because in the end, every story that survives begins the same way, with someone brave enough to walk into the dark, and someone kind enough to turn on the projector. The screen fades to white. A soft echo of Clara's voice, older now, distant, almost like narration. Light doesn't belong to the past or the future. It belongs to whoever still believes it matters. The reel slows, the hum stops, the Liberty breathes out one last time, and the story ends, not with a final frame, but with light that never leaves.